Frost appears first along the edges of the stone. Thin, white lines spreading slowly across black ground that has not seen direct light in longer than any human body could survive outside. Nothing dramatic happens at first. The plane just sits there beneath a sky with no visible source direction, no brighter edge waiting somewhere beyond the horizon, no slow color shift inside the clouds, no sign that morning is still moving toward the surface from somewhere far away. Only cold, continuing its work. Loose grains of dark dust move across the frozen ground whenever weak air passes over the plane. The movement is soft enough that it almost looks underwater for a moment. Then the particles settle again against the rock. The frost thickens anyway. At first, it feels familiar, almost comfortable. Anyone who has stepped outside before sunrise knows this kind of cold. The silence, the waiting, the assumption that light will eventually return and erase the surface layer before the day fully begins. That expectation stays active longer than it should, even while the sky refuses to change, even while the ground continues losing heat. There is no visible sun below the horizon here. No hidden dawn approaching from the opposite side of the planet. No rotation slowly carrying this landscape back toward warmth. The world is moving through darkness alone. Not orbiting far away from a star. Not trapped inside a long winter season. Completely detached. A rogue planet. A planetary body that no longer belongs to any solar system. The frost keeps forming while that fact settles in slowly somewhere behind the physical picture. Black stone. White crystal buildup. Air still moving weakly across open terrain. Nothing about the surface itself immediately explains that this planet has lost the thing most planets organize themselves around. There are no shadows stretching across the plane because there is no directional light strong enough to create them. That takes a strange amount of time to emotionally register. The eye keeps searching for orientation anyway. Somewhere brighter. Somewhere warmer. Some indication of east? The surface offers none. And after a while, the cold begins to feel different because there is no transition coming to interrupt it later. No sunrise waiting its turn beyond the horizon. Just accumulation. Frost gathering in layers thin enough to disappear under a fingertip, if a hand could survive here exposed long enough to touch the ground directly. The atmosphere is weak, but not absent. Enough movement exists for loose material to drift slowly across the plane. Enough pressure exists for weather to continue in reduced forms. That part matters more than it seems at first. A dead asteroid does not have weather. This place still does. The air continues moving over rock that will never feel morning again. Far above the surface, the sky remains almost perfectly black. Not the dark blue of Earth before dawn, not storm clouds, not ash. Just absence without gradient. The human brain keeps expecting change anyway. That expectation becomes easier to notice after a few minutes inside the environment. You realize part of your attention has been waiting for brightness to arrive automatically in the background while the narration moves elsewhere.
Deep,
but nothing changes. The frost continues spreading. Small ridges of pale crystal slowly connect across the stone like veins forming inside the surface itself. The process takes time. Long enough that individual changes become difficult to notice while they happen. Then suddenly entire sections of ground appear lighter than before. The air shifts again. Loose particles slide softly across the frozen terrain. The sky stays black. It is strange how long the mind continues treating darkness as temporary, even after being told otherwise. On Earth, night always contains an ending somewhere inside it. even during storms, even during winter, even inside polar regions where daylight disappears for long stretches of the year, the planet still remembers where the sun is. This world does not. That difference sits quietly inside the landscape rather than announcing itself dramatically. The plane simply continues existing without mourning. And after enough time passes inside that condition, the cold stops feeling like weather. It starts feeling structural. Far from any star, the planet keeps moving. No sunrise follows it. No bright edge rolls across the surface as it turns. From a distance, the world barely separates itself from the background at all. The stars remain sharp and fixed, while the planet passes slowly between them like a section of space where light stops behaving normally. Even that description feels too visible after a while. Most of the time, nobody actually sees these worlds directly. Not in the ordinary sense. A rogue planet can cross interstellar space for millions of years without reflecting enough light for a telescope to recognize a clear surface. No oceans flashing under a sun. No cloud bands catching illumination. No bright atmosphere outlining the curve of the horizon. Just mass continuing forward in darkness. Sometimes detection begins with a star very far behind it. The light from that distant star bends slightly while the unseen planet passes between. Instruments record the distortion, small changes inside measurements, a brief shift in brightness that does not match the surrounding field. Then the alignment ends. The star returns to normal. The planet keeps going. For long stretches of time, all that remains afterward is the data itself. A weak thermal trace, a gravitational effect, numbers moving slightly out of expectation inside a monitoring system that still hums quietly in an air-conditioned room somewhere on Earth. A technician might spend more time looking at the monitor frame than the object itself. Checking calibration, refreshing the comparison images again, waiting for background noise to stabilize. There is something strangely physical about that process. Coffee cooling beside a keyboard while an entire planet remains almost invisible on the screen. And the planet does not care whether it is observed correctly or not. It still has gravity. Still has weather systems, maybe buried far below frozen layers. Still has pressure pushing downward through its atmosphere if enough atmosphere survived the ejection from its original system. Still has rock, structure, motion, internal heat fading slowly through time. The object remains real even while almost nothing illuminates it. That takes longer to settle emotionally than expected. Human instinct keeps attaching existence to visibility. If something disappears into darkness, part of the brain quietly lowers its importance. A room, after the lights go out, still contains the furniture, the walls, the objects left on the table. But your relationship to the room changes immediately once you cannot see it anymore. These planets exist inside that separation permanently. Some of them may drift through regions where no nearby star becomes brighter than a distant point in the sky for longer than human civilization has existed. And still, they continue moving. The stars behind them do not react. The surrounding darkness does not react. Even the detection methods feel indirect, almost procedural, looking for slight gravitational behavior, looking for faint infrared heat escaping slowly from a surface that no longer receives external warmth. Not seeing the planet itself at first, seeing what the planet does to other things. That distinction becomes uncomfortable quietly. Because on Earth, visibility feels trustworthy. Morning arrives and confirms the world again every day. Light hits buildings, roads, skin, windows, trees. The environment reassures the nervous system continuously. This exists. This is still here. A rogue planet receives no such confirmation. And eventually, another realization begins pressing through underneath that one. If a planet can remain physically intact while nearly invisible, then darkness is not emptiness. It is only missing light. The object continues drifting anyway. Cold atmosphere moving slowly above a surface no star has touched in ages. Gravity holding stone together in complete isolation. An entire world crossing the galaxy with almost nothing reflecting from it at all. The horizon stays in the same place for so long that the eye begins treating it like a wall instead of distance. A thin line of darker black against slightly lighter black. No color gathers behind it. No pale blue pressure slowly pushing upward through the atmosphere. No orange at the edge of the world. No indirect glow slipping across the ground before sunrise arrives. The terrain just continues beneath dim starlight that barely reaches the surface at all. Wind moves across the plain in long, uneven passes. Fine particles slide over stone. Small ridges form and soften again. Sometimes the air becomes still enough that the entire landscape feels paused. Then a weak current returns and pushes dust sideways for several minutes without changing anything else. The horizon remains exactly the same. At first, the brain keeps tracking time automatically anyway, waiting for shadows to shift, waiting for the sky to reveal direction. Even on Earth, people do this without noticing. A quick look through a window, the color of a room changing slightly in late afternoon, the angle of sunlight on a wall. Tiny environmental signals constantly updating the nervous system. Morning. Afternoon. Evening. This world provides none of that. Time continues passing physically, but the sky does not participate. After a while, that absence starts affecting orientation in strange ways. Not dramatic confusion, something slower. More like walking through a dark hallway at night after your eyes fully adjust. At first, everything feels hidden. Then, gradually, shapes return, edges separate, distances become usable again. But the hallway still does not tell you what time it is. This planet feels like that continuously. The stars above the surface remain faint and fixed for enormous stretches of time. Some atmospheric glow may exist near the horizon if internal heat still escapes through layers below the crust. Weak electrical activity inside upper clouds. Thin chemical haze catching traces of distant starlight. But nothing cycles. Nothing announces transition. The environment simply persists. And eventually the listener stops waiting for dawn, too. That adaptation happens quietly. The horizon loses its unfinished feeling. The darkness stops feeling temporary. Even the idea of morning begins sounding slightly misplaced here, like a habit carried over from another environment where the sky still behaves in human ways. The wind crosses the terrain again. Loose material skims low across the surface. Far above, the stars remain motionless enough that the sky almost resembles a printed image instead of an atmosphere. Then the planet rotates slightly further through space, and still nothing changes visibly. That part becomes heavier later, because rotation exists here. The planet still turns. The ground beneath the horizon is still moving through time exactly as Earth does. One full rotation after another. Long cycles continuing mechanically in complete darkness. But without sunlight, rotation loses its visual evidence. The surface no longer teaches the body when time has passed. A person standing here for long enough would probably begin relying on procedure instead. Mechanical clocks, scheduled routines, timers running inside sealed equipment. Maybe the soft vibration of environmental systems repeating at fixed intervals inside a habitat somewhere beneath the surface. Human beings would need to manufacture rhythm manually. Otherwise, the environment would just continue. Static horizon. Cold air movement. Stars that never brighten. And a sky permanently missing the colors that taught human civilization how to feel the beginning of a day. Inside the operations room, night has no horizon. Only weak monitor light. A row of desks. Old swivel chairs. Coffee sitting too close to keyboards. Cooling fans running underneath the soft electrical noise of the room. On the main display, no planet appears. No dark sphere. No visible surface. No edge for the eye to hold on to. Only a thin line on a graph updating slowly against familiar background data. One technician watches it longer than necessary, then checks it again. Not because anything looks dramatic, because it still is not clear enough. Night shifts create their own kind of uncertainty. Tired eyes make every signal feel slightly more important. A small numerical deviation might be real data, or only noise. One screen refresh can lower confidence across the room for a few seconds. Nobody talks much. One person opens the calibration tables. Another reloads comparison data from the surrounding starfield. A chair creaks softly when someone changes position. Coffee cools beside a stack of printed notes. Out there, if the object is real, it is still moving between stars. But inside this room, it exists mostly as a distortion inside somebody else's light. A background star brightens and dims slightly out of pattern. Not because the star itself changed, because mass passed through the line of observation. The light bent slightly. The system recorded the bend. And now a group of tired people inside a dim room are trying to decide whether that bend behaves enough like a world to matter. The process sounds dry. Almost too dry for a planet. But that is part of what stays with you. An entire world may never enter the image directly. It may only bend a graph. It may only force a measurement to be checked twice. It may only keep a technician awake longer than planned because if the anomaly gets dismissed too early, a planet could pass through the observation network almost unnoticed. There is a moment during these shifts that feels completely ordinary. Someone presses the wrong key. A software window opens accidentally. A note gets rewritten more clearly for the morning crew. The room still behaves like work. Not like contact with another world. Then the graph updates again. The deviation remains. Not larger in any dramatic way. Not self-explanatory. Still there. And the room grows slightly quieter because everyone has started treating that tiny distortion as something with physical weight. That is the strange part. Nobody has seen the surface. Nobody has seen an atmosphere. Nobody has seen the horizon that never changes color, or the wind dragging dust across frozen ground. But the routines inside the room have already begun reorganizing around it. Data gets archived separately. Timestamps are marked. Calibration checks repeat. A planet has not appeared visually, yet it has already started creating work for human beings. Maybe observation does not always begin with seeing. Sometimes it begins when an ordinary system stops matching itself completely. A background light shifts slightly wrong. A curve bends a little too far. A night shift quietly extends itself. And somewhere beyond the room, the unseen world keeps moving forward. Not requiring direct visibility. Only enough mass to force distant light to change direction. Wind continues crossing the surface long after the planet stops feeling completely dead. That realization arrives slowly. At first, the atmosphere just seems thin and cold. Frozen particles slide low across the terrain in uneven streams. Pressure shifts move through the darkness gradually enough that the surface almost appears asleep between gusts. Then the air moves again. Loose ice drifts over black stone that has not received direct sunlight in longer than human history. Emotion feels familiar anyway. That is the uncomfortable part. Wind automatically creates emotional activity inside the human brain. On Earth, moving air usually belongs to living systems. Oceans heating, forests breathing moisture upward, weather cycles feeding rivers, clouds, migration patterns. Even during winter nights, strong wind outside a house still feels connected to life somewhere. Here, the atmosphere continues functioning without any ecosystem underneath it. No forests depend on the circulation. No rainfall feeds soil. No insects wait beneath rock formations for warmer conditions. The weather has detached itself from biology completely. And still it continues. The surface pressure shifts slightly through the darkness. Thin atmospheric currents carry frozen material across open ground. In some regions, buried internal heat may still leak upward from deeper layers inside the planet. A thick enough atmosphere can trap part of that heat for enormous stretches of time. So the world never becomes fully inactive. Not warm, not alive, but not motionless either. That distinction takes time to settle emotionally because movement usually feels reassuring. A landscape with weather feels inhabited even when nobody is there. The sound alone would probably affect a person standing on the surface. Wind scraping across exposed rock. Fine particles striking equipment slowly over time. Weak atmospheric vibration passing through metal structures anchored into frozen ground. After enough exposure, the environment might almost begin feeling normal. You could imagine routine there for a moment. Checking seals. Clearing ice buildup from exterior instruments. Listening to the air move outside while interior heating systems hum quietly in the background. The planet almost starts behaving like a place people could emotionally adapt to. Then another realization arrives later and changes the atmosphere again. Nothing on the surface actually needs the weather to happen. That cold circulation exists for no ecosystem. The wind is not carrying seeds. The pressure changes are not part of seasonal growth. No migration follows the storms. No coastline waits for rain. The atmosphere keeps operating anyway, like a machine continuing its cycle long after the original purpose disappeared. And maybe that comparison is unfair for a second. Maybe purpose was never required in the first place. Earth trained human instincts to connect weather with life because life here learned how to use weather everywhere it could. But wind itself does not care whether anything is alive beneath it. It only requires energy, motion, temperature difference, pressure imbalance. The air crosses the terrain again. Frozen grains slide over stone in long, shallow streams. Far above the surface, the sky remains starless, except for a few distant points of light barely strong enough to touch the ground at all. And beneath that darkness, The atmosphere keeps moving across the planet exactly as if something important still depended on it. The coldest regions of the planet are not always the deepest ones. That realization changes the shape of the world again. Far below the frozen surface, pressure continues moving through buried layers of rock that still remember their formation. Heat remains trapped underground, long after the sky stopped providing anything useful. The warmth comes from below now. Not from sunlight. Not from a nearby star. Inside the crust, old energy continues leaking outward slowly through fractures, compressed minerals, and dense internal layers that have not fully cooled yet. The surface above may remain locked in permanent darkness, while deeper regions stay comparatively warm for enormous stretches of time. Not comfortable. Not bright. But active. The transition between those layers would probably feel strange to a human body. Imagine descending through freezing stone while the temperature slowly rises instead of falling. Ice tightening around rock overhead while lower chambers release weak thermal pressure upward through the crust. At some depth, the planet begins behaving differently. The sounds would change first. Surface wind disappearing behind thick layers of stone, then slower noises. Deep pressure movement. Occasional cracking sounds carrying through buried ice. Metal structures settling slightly as surrounding temperatures shift over time. The environment would not feel dead underground. It would feel sealed. That distinction matters more than expected. On Earth, warmth usually arrives from above. Morning sunlight through windows. Heat collecting on pavement. Summer air pressing downward from the sky. Human instinct ties brightness and warmth together so completely that separating them feels unnatural at first. This planet breaks that connection quietly. The sky remains useless. The ground becomes the source instead. And after spending enough time with that idea, even ordinary places on Earth begin feeling slightly different for a moment. Basements during winter. Underground train platforms warmer than the streets above them. Steam rising through sidewalk vents late at night while cold air moves overhead. Heat does not always belong to daylight. The rogue planet keeps demonstrating that physically, buried pockets may remain warmer than the exposed surface for millions of years depending on the planet's size, internal chemistry, and the amount of energy trapped during formation. Radioactive materials continue decaying slowly inside the rock. Compression deep within the planet still produces pressure and heat. The atmosphere above may freeze. The deeper layers continue changing anyway. And that creates another uncomfortable possibility. A world can lose its star without becoming entirely inactive. The surface may look abandoned while hidden environments continue operating below. Not forests. Not open oceans under blue skies. Something else. Something cut off completely from sunlight, yet still shaped by temperature, pressure, chemistry, and time. The planet stops feeling like a frozen object drifting through darkness. It starts feeling layered. Cold above. Slow warmth below. A dead sky over a planet that still has interior weather no one can see directly. Deep underground, ice contracts against stone with small cracking sounds that would echo for long distances through sealed chambers. And above all of it, the frozen surface continues, facing a sky that never gives anything back. Far beneath the frozen crust, water keeps moving in complete darkness. Not exposed to the sky. Not reflecting stars. Not touched by sunlight at any point in the planet's recent history. An ocean exists there anyway. The ice above it may stretch for kilometers. thick enough to seal the water completely away from open space, thick enough that no surface storm could ever break through into the depths below. And still, the ocean continues shifting underneath it. Slow thermal movement carries darker water upward, while colder layers descend again through hidden circulation patterns no eye will ever directly observe. Pressure moves through the buried sea gradually enough that the environment might feel motionless at first. Then a deep cracking sound rolls through the ice overhead. Not sharp, slow. Heavy. The kind of sound large structures make when pressure has been building quietly for a very long time. Afterward, the water settles again. That rhythm could continue for millions of years without ever being seen from the surface. The strange part is how quickly the mind begins treating the ocean as emotionally familiar anyway. Water changes the feeling of the planet immediately. Even now, even buried under permanent ice. Human instinct still connects oceans with openness, movement, weather, coastlines, distance. A body of water feels like part of a living world almost automatically. But this ocean has no horizon above it. No moonlight crossing the surface. No tides visible from shore. No sunrise reflecting across waves. The water exists entirely inside enclosure. That changes the emotional scale of it. The ocean does not feel exposed to the planet. It feels trapped inside it. And after sitting with that image for a while, ordinary sounds on Earth begin changing slightly too. Pipes moving water through walls late at night. The muted pressure sounds inside old buildings during winter. Underground drainage systems carrying unseen water beneath city streets while people walk overhead without thinking about it. Movement does not require visibility. An environment can remain physically active while staying completely hidden from the sky. The rogue planet keeps extending that idea further. Heat from deeper layers below the crust may continue preventing the buried ocean from freezing solid. Thick ice above acts like insulation, trapping enough energy underneath for liquid water to persist through geological timescales. Not warm in any human sense, but fluid. Still changing shape. Still responding to pressure and temperature inside the darkness. And eventually, the listener notices something else changing too. Darkness itself stops feeling empty. Earlier in the documentary, darkness felt like absence, a missing sun, a missing morning, a surface abandoned by light. Now darkness begins feeling occupied, layered, full of hidden movement. The buried ocean keeps shifting slowly beneath the ice shell, while the frozen surface above continues drifting through interstellar space. No sky ever opens above the water. No daylight ever reaches it. And still the ocean remains there, moving quietly under a ceiling of ice that never melts away. After enough time inside the planet's darkness, the conditions stop feeling unusual every second. The frost returns across the same regions of stone. Thin layers forming slowly over surfaces that never receive morning light. Pressure shifts continue through the buried ice below. The atmosphere circulates in weak patterns that repeat often enough to feel familiar. Nothing dramatic interrupts the cycle. That changes the listener more than expected. Earlier, the darkness felt active in the wrong way. Heavy, constantly noticeable. Every description of the planet seemed connected to missing sunlight somehow. Now the absence itself starts fading into the background. The environment simply continues. The person living there long enough would probably stop paying attention to the darkness most of the time. The same way people on Earth stop noticing the hum inside buildings after a few minutes. Refrigerators, ventilation systems, water moving through pipes behind walls late at night. At first, the sound stands out. Later, the brain folds it into normal reality. This planet begins doing something similar. The frozen surface remains black. The underground ocean keeps shifting beneath the crust. Internal heat still leaks upward through rock that cools very slowly over geological time. And eventually, none of those conditions feel surprising moment to moment anymore. They just feel environmental. That adaptation happens quietly. Even the rhythms of the world begin reorganizing themselves away from sunlight. Small atmospheric cycles repeat across the surface. Pressure changes move through the buried ocean below. Internal heat creates regions that stay slightly more active than others over long periods of time. The planet still has patterns. They just no longer come from day and night. At some point, the listener may notice something uncomfortable. The documentary itself has stopped treating darkness like an emergency. There are no repeated reminders that the sky is missing sunlight. No constant return to how impossible the environment originally seemed. The narration has started moving through the world normally too. And that realization lands slightly later than the adaptation itself. Because humans adjust to repetition faster than they realize while it is happening. A dark room inside a familiar house stops feeling dark after enough nights crossing it half asleep without turning lights on. Your body learns distances automatically. The location of furniture, the angle of doorways, the exact number of steps before reaching the kitchen. The rogue planet slowly creates the same emotional condition. Not comfort exactly. Something closer to operational familiarity. The frost forms again. A slow cracking sound travels through buried ice somewhere below the surface. The atmosphere continues drifting across open terrain without weather maps, seasons, or sunrise transitions to organize it. Nothing announces the passage of time clearly anymore. And still the planet keeps developing routines inside itself. That may be the strangest shift so far. Not that darkness exists here. That darkness eventually stops feeling important enough to notice constantly. The world continues operating anyway. Cold stone, moving water beneath ice, weak heat rising upward from below, and a sky that has remained black long enough for the mind to begin accepting it as ordinary. Nothing about the planet changes during the realization. The frost still forms across the surface. The underground ocean still moves beneath the ice. Weak atmospheric circulation still drifts through darkness that never turns blue. Everything physical continues exactly as before. Only the interpretation changes. And suddenly the planet stops feeling empty. That shift arrives almost awkwardly because the documentary has already spent so much time inside the environment before fully noticing the mistake. The world was never inactive, never frozen in the way abandoned objects are frozen. It had pressure movement, weather cycles, buried heat, moving water, repeating environmental patterns. But the human brain kept emotionally translating darkness into absence anyway. Probably because that is how vision trained us to survive. An unlit field feels riskier than a lit one. An open doorway at night feels less occupied than the same doorway during daylight. People trust illuminated spaces automatically, often before thinking about them at all. The rogue planet keeps exposing that habit layer by layer. The conditions were physically active long before they felt emotionally real. That may be the heavier realization sitting underneath all this. Not that hidden worlds exist, That human perception may quietly downgrade entire environments simply because sunlight is missing from them. A room with the lights off can feel empty for a second even when someone is still inside it. The same thing may happen at planetary scale. Out in the galaxy, rogue planets could exist in enormous numbers between the stars. Some small, some massive enough to hold thick atmospheres and buried oceans beneath frozen crusts. Entire physical systems continuing through darkness without producing enough visible light for human instinct to emotionally register them as worlds. That word matters now. Worlds. Earlier in the documentary, the planet often felt more like a condition, a frozen object, a drifting absence, something defined mainly by what it had lost. Now it begins feeling geographically real. A place with layers, pressure zones, thermal movement, repeating environmental behavior, not visible from far away, still real. And the shift happens without the environment changing at all. The frost reforms again across cold stone. Deep below, water continues moving under kilometers of buried ice. Internal heat keeps leaking slowly upward from rock that formed billions of years ago. Nothing announces itself dramatically. The listener simply realizes the darkness was interfering with recognition the entire time. Maybe that happens more often than people notice. Human senses evolved under sunlight, open horizons, visible movement, predictable cycles of day and night. Brightness became emotionally linked with certainty. Visibility became linked with presence. This planet breaks those connections quietly. Because once the listener adjusts to the conditions, the darkness no longer feels like the most important feature of the world. It starts feeling more like a filter placed between the world and human perception. The planet continues operating behind it anyway. Cold atmosphere above. Warmth below. Water moving under ice no sky has touched in ages. And a world that only started feeling emotionally real after the listener stopped expecting light to confirm its existence. The graph rises slowly across the monitor. Not enough to look dramatic. Just a smooth curve lifting above the background measurements before settling downward again. One operator watches the shape complete itself in near silence, then scrolls backward, checks the timing markers, runs the comparison again. The room stays dim except for monitor light and a small desk lamp glowing beside a stack of printed calibration sheets. Somebody opens another coffee without really looking away from the screen. The planet never appears visually. That part becomes harder to ignore now. Earlier in the documentary, darkness felt like the barrier, a hidden surface, a missing source of light. But here the problem is stranger than darkness. The telescope is already receiving light, just not from the planet itself. A distant star far behind the object brightens briefly as gravity bends the path of its light toward Earth. Then the alignment passes. The signal fades. The star returns to normal again. The world reveals itself only as a temporary distortion. And afterward, the technicians begin trying to reconstruct the invisible object mathematically from the shape of the curve it left behind. That process feels procedural for a while. Normal, even. One person adjusts the sensitivity settings slightly because the signal edge looks uneven. Another checks whether nearby equipment drifted during the observation window. A cooling system hums steadily behind the server racks. Someone quietly says the event duration feels short. No one reacts much. The graph remains more important than conversation, because the event may never happen exactly this way again. That is part of the pressure surrounding these detections. Microlensing events move on. The alignment changes, stars separate again. The hidden object continues through space while the telescope network stays behind, studying a brief distortion that already ended. The observation itself belongs to the past almost immediately, and the planet still never enters direct view. No surface image arrives afterward to emotionally complete the detection. No frozen horizon, no drifting frost. No underground ocean visible beneath cracked ice. Just a curve on a monitor that behaved slightly differently from expectation for a short period of time during the night shift. The strange thing is that the measurements still feel convincing. Not emotionally convincing at first, physically convincing. The numbers remain stable across repeated checks. The timing matches gravitational behavior. Independent systems produce similar results. The hidden mass leaves fingerprints inside the light even while refusing visual contact completely. Reality is still interacting with the instruments. The instruments are simply not built for human intuition. That separation grows heavier the longer the operators stay with the data. One of them zooms into the curve again. The rise. The peak. The slow decline afterward. Nothing inside the graph resembles a world emotionally. And yet the graph may represent an entire planet moving through interstellar darkness at that exact moment. Cold atmosphere above frozen ground. Pressure shifts under buried ice. Water moving below the crust where no sunlight has reached for ages. All of it compressed into a temporary brightening inside somebody else's star. The operator checks the spike one more time before saving the observation archive. 3. Then the room settles back into ordinary equipment noise while the invisible world continues moving beyond the range of direct sight. Before sunrise, apartment windows begin glowing one by one across the city. Kitchen lights. Bathroom mirrors. Coffee makers starting in dark rooms while people move through routines they barely think about anymore. Outside, the sky is still blue-black above the streets. Traffic remains thin. Store signs stay brighter than the horizon for a little while longer. Then morning starts arriving across the buildings almost all at once. Curtains brighten slowly. Streetlights switch off. Bird sounds begin before the sun itself fully clears the horizon. Nobody stops to notice how much movement depends on that transition. Not consciously. Bodies wake differently once light enters the room. Temperatures shift. Schedules accelerate. Delivery trucks leave warehouses. Heating systems change behavior. Plants begin reacting immediately on balconies and rooftops where sunlight reaches first. The entire surface of Earth reorganizes itself every morning around incoming solar energy. That process feels so normal it almost disappears. Which is strange after spending so long inside the rogue planet. Because out there, none of this happens. No city rotates toward daylight. No pale glow gathers slowly behind distant buildings. No biological rush begins inside millions of bodies at nearly the same time because a star has reappeared above the horizon. The rogue planet remains physically active, but it never experiences this particular kind of transition. That difference lands harder now than it might have earlier in the documentary. At first, sunrise feels aesthetic. Pretty light moving across clouds, shadows shortening over streets, warm color returning to windows after night. But the longer you stay with it, the more mechanical it starts feeling. Morning is infrastructure. Earth runs on repeated solar arrival. Power usage changes around it. Sleep cycles organize around it. Weather systems feed from it continuously. Ocean temperatures, wind circulation, plant growth, migration behavior, rainfall patterns. Even the chemistry of the atmosphere itself all remain tied to the steady presence of one nearby star. And humans build routines directly into that cycle. Coffee before dawn. Alarm clocks timed around sunrise without people consciously thinking about why. Office towers brightening floor by floor. Someone standing half awake beside a sink while early light slowly reaches the wall behind them. The rogue planet has none of those moments. Not because time stopped there. Because time continues without sunlight organizing it. That distinction becomes difficult to unnotice once it settles in properly. On Earth, daylight feels like the neutral condition planets naturally exist inside. But it is local. Specific. A narrow environmental arrangement tied to one star and one orbit. Elsewhere, entire worlds may continue through darkness without mornings at all. Still rotating. Still carrying atmospheres. Still moving water beneath frozen crusts. Still producing weather systems that never become visible in dawn light because dawn never arrives there in the first place. Meanwhile, Earth keeps turning into sunlight again. Windows brighten further across the city. Clouds begin separating from the color of the sky. People step outside already adjusting emotionally to the day before fully looking upward. And for a moment, sunrise stops feeling automatic. It starts feeling supplied. Dust keeps moving across the surface whether anyone observes it or not. Thin streams of frozen particles slide over black stone during weak atmospheric shifts. Some collect against ridges. Some disappear into cracks that slowly seal again beneath layers of pressure and ice. Nothing pauses. Nothing reacts. The planet does not become more active when telescopes detect it. The underground heat does not rise differently because a graph changed shape inside an observatory on Earth. Buried water continues circulating below the crust with the same slow movement it had before the measurements were recorded. That separation feels colder now than the darkness ever did. Earlier in the documentary, the listener kept trying to emotionally reconnect the world to observation somehow, through telescopes, through sunrise comparisons, through data, through imagination filling in the missing surface. But the planet itself never participated in that effort. The geology continues independently. Ice contracts. Pressure redistributes through buried layers. Fractures form slowly, then reseal under accumulating weight over spans of time too large for human routines to emotionally follow. And all of it happens whether the planet is detected or not. That sounds obvious for a moment. Then it becomes heavier later. Because human environments constantly respond to attention. A room changes when somebody enters it. Lights switch on, doors open, conversations stop briefly. Even abandoned places change once they are revisited. Dust patterns break beneath footsteps. Air moves differently through opened spaces. People are used to observation causing physical interruption. This planet never acknowledges observers at all. The frozen terrain remains physically complete without audience, witness, or interpretation. That may be why the surface feels difficult to emotionally hold on to sometimes. Human instinct keeps expecting visibility to create relationship. If something is seen, recorded, photographed, mapped, then emotionally it begins joining ordinary reality. But the rogue planet does not need recognition to continue existing fully. The processes underneath the crust continue at planetary scale regardless of whether any living system ever becomes aware of them. A layer of ice shifts several centimeters over thousands of years. Heat leaks upward through buried rock. Dust gathers gradually across exposed terrain, the same way dust settles inside empty buildings on Earth after people stop entering them. The comparison arrives quietly. An abandoned house does not stop aging once nobody looks at it anymore. Air still carries particles through broken windows. Wood still expands and contracts with temperature changes. Water still moves slowly through walls during storms. Reality keeps operating in empty rooms. The rogue planet extends that condition outward to an entire world. And after sitting with that idea long enough, observation itself starts feeling smaller than before. Not meaningless, just local. Limited. A brief biological activity happening inside one species near one star. Meanwhile, the planet continues through interstellar darkness with complete physical indifference to whether it is ever directly seen again. Dust crossing frozen ground. Pressure shifting under buried ice. Fractures sealing slowly beneath the crust. And no part of the environment waiting for confirmation that it exists. The young system does not look orderly yet. Not really. There is a star at the center, but the material around it is still unsettled. Gas, dust, hot fragments, and forming worlds move through paths that have not learned how to stay clean. Orbits cross. Distances change. Gravity keeps correcting things too late. For a while, the system looks like it is building planets. Then it starts losing one. A newly formed world moves too close to another large body, not close enough to collide, close enough for gravity to take its future apart. Its path stretches. The orbit becomes wider, then sharper, then wrong. The planet accelerates outward while the rest of the system continues rearranging behind it. This is not exile in the human sense. No decision is made. No border is crossed on purpose. It is just mass, speed, angle, and timing producing an outcome that cannot be taken back. A world that may have spent only a short part of its early life circling a star is thrown into interstellar space before any stable history can form around it. Before weather settles into a long pattern. Before moons finish adjusting. Before the surface has any reason to feel permanent. Before anyone would ever have named it. The system behind it begins to calm down after the violence. That part is almost worse. The remaining planets slowly find cleaner paths. Collisions become less frequent. Dust thins. The central star keeps burning. From far away, the system may eventually look stable, orderly, finished. But one of its worlds is gone. The missing planet becomes part of how the order was achieved. That changes the idea of formation. It stops feeling like a neat process where planets simply gather, settle, and remain. Early systems can behave more like crowded rooms during a chaotic move. Boxes carried too quickly, furniture blocking doorways, something important placed down for a moment and never found again. Except here, the lost thing is a planet. And the room never closes. Once the world escapes the gravitational hold of its star, there may be no returning path. The star becomes just another light behind it, shrinking into the background. The warmth fades. The orbit is no longer an orbit. The planet keeps its mass, its rock, its internal heat. Maybe even some atmosphere, if it is large enough and fortunate enough. But it loses the system that would have made it easy to understand. That is the part that presses forward. A planet does not have to fail after formation. It can be produced successfully and still be removed. It can be shaped by the same violent process that leaves other planets safely circling their star. Drifting may not be an exception added later. It may be one of the ordinary outcomes of planetary birth. For a moment, the rogue planet no longer feels like a lonely object discovered after the fact. It feels like evidence left over from the instability that built systems in the first place. The frozen world in darkness began somewhere brighter, in a disk of dust, near a young star. Among other forming planets whose gravity had not yet settled into manners. Then one encounter changed the path. The system kept its star. The planet kept moving. And behind it, the light that once organized its future became only another point in the dark. The planet keeps turning. That is easy to forget for a while. Frozen dust still drifts across the surface. Weak atmospheric pressure still moves through the darkness in slow, uneven currents. Buried ice still cracks under shifting stress deep below the crust. But none of those things clearly reveal rotation anymore. No sunrise crosses the horizon. No shadows move across the ground. No warm edge of morning rolls gradually over stone. The world rotates without producing a day. At first, the listener keeps expecting some visible confirmation anyway. A brightening sky, a changing direction, even a slight color shift somewhere near the horizon. Nothing comes. The surface remains almost visually identical hour after hour while the entire planet continues spinning through space. That separation begins affecting time itself. On Earth, rotation constantly announces its presence. Morning light enters rooms. Afternoon shadows slide across walls. Evening slowly removes detail from the landscape until windows become mirrors again. People rarely think about the fact that the planet is turning beneath them because the sky keeps translating motion into visible experience. The rogue planet does not do that. Its rotation becomes mechanical instead of emotional. A buried process. Like a clock ticking inside a sealed room where nobody can see the hands moving. There may still be tiny environmental changes across the surface, weak temperature differences between regions, slight atmospheric variation caused by internal heat escaping unevenly from below. Frost patterns slowly thickening in some areas while thinning in others over long stretches of time. But the changes arrive too slowly to feel like day and night. The environment no longer teaches the body how much time has passed. That detail sits quietly for a while before becoming heavier. Because human beings do not experience time directly very often, usually people experience changing light instead. The angle of sunlight through a kitchen window, darkness arriving earlier during winter, bright supermarket parking lots after sunset, the color of the sky behind buildings during late afternoon traffic. Earth constantly externalizes time into the environment. The rogue planet stops doing that almost completely. The person living there long enough would probably begin trusting machines more than instinct. Timers, shift schedules, artificial lighting cycles inside underground shelters, heated rooms programmed to brighten and dim at fixed intervals because the surface itself no longer provides reliable psychological orientation. Someone might wake from sleep and have no immediate sense whether only minutes passed or many hours. The world outside would look nearly the same either way. That condition feels strangely familiar after a moment. Windowless offices, long flights across time zones, basements where people lose track of weather outside, casinos designed without clocks near the ceiling, hospitals late at night under permanent fluorescent light. Humans already build environments where time separates from the sky. The rogue planet simply extends that separation outward until it becomes planetary. And meanwhile, the rotation continues anyway. The world turns through darkness exactly as Earth does. One full rotation after another. Perfectly real motion producing almost no visible emotional evidence on the surface at all. The frost reforms. The buried ice shifts slowly below the crust. The atmosphere drifts across black terrain under distant stars that barely move from the same positions overhead. And somewhere inside that stillness, the planet keeps measuring time mechanically, without ever showing morning to anyone again. Morning light spreads slowly across the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. Just a pale rectangle moving further across the tiles while somebody waits for coffee to finish brewing. A refrigerator hums softly in the background. Outside the window, clouds continue sliding through the atmosphere above streets already filling with traffic. Nothing about the scene feels unusual. That may be the strange part now. Because after spending so long with rogue planets, Earth stops feeling like the default version of a world. It starts feeling specific. Local. A particular environmental arrangement that human beings happen to evolve inside. The sunlight reaching the floorboards. The warm atmosphere holding moisture close to the surface. The regular return of dawn every morning. Cloud systems bright enough to glow from above instead of disappearing into darkness. These conditions feel emotionally normal because they have surrounded human life from the beginning. But the galaxy may contain enormous numbers of planets where none of those things happen. Worlds without sunrise. Worlds with buried oceans no sky has touched in ages. Worlds where weather moves across frozen terrain under permanent darkness while no biological system waits for daylight to return. And the longer that comparison remains active, the more Earth changes shape emotionally. Not visually. Physically, it remains the same planet people already know. Oceans reflecting sunlight, trees moving in warm air, rain arriving through illuminated clouds during afternoon storms. But the feeling of normality begins slipping slightly. Earth starts resembling a rare lighting condition layered over geology rather than the standard form planets naturally take. That realization arrives quietly through ordinary details. Steam rising from wet pavement after rain. Sunlight catching dust inside a bedroom. The bright edge of the atmosphere visible from airplane windows during early morning flights. People unconsciously treat these conditions as basic planetary behavior. But they may belong to a much narrower category of worlds than human instinct assumes. The rogue planet changed that. Not by proving Earth is fragile exactly. More by separating the idea of planet from the idea of daylight. Those concepts stayed emotionally fused together for most of human history. A planet meant open sky, visible weather, horizons changing color, shadows moving across ground. Now the connection feels less stable. A world can rotate without producing dawn. An atmosphere can move without supporting biology. Water can remain active beneath kilometers of buried ice while no sunlight reaches it at all. The galaxy does not appear required to organize planets around human expectations. Meanwhile, Earth continues behaving the way it always has. Morning light climbs slowly higher across the kitchen floor. Cloud shadows drift across parking lots and rooftops outside. People move through familiar routines while sunlight passes through windows strongly enough to organize entire emotional states without anyone needing to think about it directly. And for a moment, the ordinary brightness of Earth stops feeling universal. It feels supplied. temporary. A local condition surrounding one illuminated world among many others, still moving unseen through the dark. The planet is not traveling toward anything now. No nearby star waits ahead of it. No collision appears slowly in the distance. No rescue arrives through the darkness. The world simply continues. Frozen particles drift across the surface in thin, uneven streams, while weak atmospheric movement passes over the terrain again and again. Deep below the crust, buried heat still pushes slowly upward through rock and compressed ice that cooled long ago, but never fully stopped changing. Nothing about the environment suggests interruption. That takes time to accept emotionally. Human beings are used to conditions resolving themselves eventually. Storms pass, machines shut down, flights land, winter gives way to spring. Even abandoned buildings carry the feeling that someone may return someday and switch the lights back on. The rogue planet does not carry that feeling anymore. Earlier in the documentary, the darkness often felt temporary, without the listener fully noticing why. The mind kept expecting some later transition, a star appearing again, a system pulling the planet back inward, some future correction that would reconnect the world to visible daylight. But the planet already exists inside its long-term condition. This is not the middle of a process. The drifting itself became stable ages ago. The atmosphere continues moving because physical systems are still active there. Internal heat rises slowly through buried layers. Pressure shifts through the crust. Frost thickens across exposed regions and later softens again through subtle underground warming cycles no sky ever reveals directly. The world keeps operating without emotional urgency. That calmness changes the feeling of the darkness more than anything else has so far. Darkness no longer feels like deprivation. It starts feeling environmental. The same way deep ocean water on Earth feels environmental, or polar winter, or underground transit tunnels carrying air through concrete spaces while trains stop running overnight. A condition does not need to end in order to be physically complete. The rogue planet demonstrates that quietly, the stars above the surface shift very slowly over spans of time too large for human routines to follow directly. Constellations gradually deform, distances change. Entire regions of the sky rearrange themselves across millions of years, while the frozen planet keeps moving forward without destination. Not lost exactly, just unattached. And somewhere along the way, the listener may notice the planet stopped feeling lonely too. That interpretation belonged mostly to human expectation. Humans attach emotional meaning to isolation because people evolved socially inside illuminated environments full of biological signals and visible activity. The planet is not emotionally aware of separation. Its atmosphere still circulates. Its buried water may still move beneath the crust. Its internal heat still leaks upward through rock older than human civilization. The systems continue. A machine left running overnight after everyone goes home does not become unfinished simply because nobody is watching it anymore. The rogue planet carries a similar feeling now. Not waiting, not suspended. Not preparing for transformation. Just continuing through interstellar darkness under distant stars that slowly change position while the surface remains cold enough for frost to gather again across the same fields of black stone. The curtains open halfway and morning enters the room immediately. Not slowly enough to notice it first. Just light spreading across a chair left near the window, across folded clothes, across dust resting on a shelf that nobody cleaned yesterday. Outside, traffic moves through wet streets while clouds brighten from gray into pale white above the buildings. Somewhere farther down the block, a delivery truck reverses with a soft, repeating alarm. Birds start before most people speak. The routines begin automatically. Coffee machines click on. Phones light up beside beds. Streetlights shut off one row at a time because sensors detect enough sunlight returning across the city. Almost nobody thinks about the star responsible for any of it. That absence of attention feels different now. Because after spending so long inside the rogue planet, daylight no longer feels like the background condition of reality. It feels more like a continuous supply arriving from a very specific direction at very specific intervals. Earth rotates into the light again, and entire biological systems respond immediately. Not emotionally at first. Physically. Body temperature shifts slightly before people fully wake. Hormones change. Plants begin reacting through windows. Birds alter movement patterns. Heating systems reduce output in buildings already warming from sunlight touching the exterior walls. Morning behaves less like scenery the longer you watch it closely. It behaves more like infrastructure. And the strange thing is how ordinary humans remain inside it while barely noticing. Someone opens curtains without looking at the sky. Another person walks outside carrying coffee while squinting against brightness strong enough to power weather systems across an entire planet. The dependence remains mostly invisible because it never stops. That may be why rogue planets changed the feeling of Earth so much during this documentary. Not because Earth became fragile, exactly. The planet still feels solid beneath people's feet. Oceans still move. Wind still carries rain through the atmosphere. Morning still arrives on schedule. But now the schedule itself feels physical. Specific. Contingent. The sunlight entering the room no longer feels emotionally guaranteed in the same way it did earlier. It feels maintained. A nearby star continues burning at stable intensity while Earth keeps rotating through the correct distance, the correct angle, the correct timing for liquid water, visible weather, biological rhythm, and familiar human mornings to continue together. Outside, more windows brighten across the apartment buildings. Clouds separate from the color of the sky. People begin crossing intersections already organizing their day around light levels without consciously realizing it. And somewhere far beyond all of it, rogue planets continue moving through darkness where none of these transitions ever happen. No sunrise reaches their surfaces. No morning traffic forms beneath brightening clouds. No curtains open toward daylight. The worlds continue anyway. But here, on Earth, sunlight keeps entering rooms strongly enough to make ordinary life feel emotionally safe before anyone even fully wakes up. And for a moment, that safety stops feeling universal. It feels local. A temporary morning spreading across one rotating world while countless others remain cold and unseen beyond the reach of dawn. Wind moves across the plain again. Thin frost spreads slowly over black stone, while loose particles drift low across the surface in uneven lines. Some gather against exposed ridges. Some disappear into cracks beneath the ice where pressure keeps changing slowly underground. Nothing on the horizon brightens. The sky remains the same depth of black it was before. No distant edge softens into blue. No sunlight approaches from behind the curvature of the world. The atmosphere continues moving anyway. That condition no longer feels interrupted now. Earlier in the documentary, the surface often carried the emotional feeling of delay, as if the planet had somehow fallen out of the normal sequence of things. Morning missing, warmth missing, light missing. But the frost keeps forming with no sign that anything is absent from the environment itself. The world already exists inside its complete condition. Cold air crosses the terrain. Buried heat rises slowly upward through deep layers of rock and compressed ice. The crust contracts in some regions, while weak thermal pressure softens others over spans of time too large to notice directly. Nothing waits for dawn because dawn is not part of the system anymore. That realization settles quietly now instead of arriving sharply. The listener has already spent enough time inside the planet for the darkness to stop behaving like suspense. The surface no longer feels abandoned. It no longer feels paused between states. It simply behaves according to different physical conditions than Earth. The frost thickens around the edges of exposed stone. Wind pushes frozen grains sideways across the plain. Far above the surface, distant stars remain fixed long enough that the sky almost resembles something painted instead of astronomical. The planet keeps rotating underneath them. No visible sign of morning appears during the turn. And after a while, even that stops feeling unusual. On Earth, frost usually carries a promise inside it. Sunrise eventually reaches rooftops, grass, parked cars, power lines. Ice softens, water drips from surfaces. Shadows shorten as warmth spreads slowly through the atmosphere again. Here, the frost has no opposite condition waiting behind it. It forms because the surface remains cold. It continues because nothing arrives to interrupt it. The atmosphere moves across dark terrain exactly as it did before and exactly as it will continue doing afterward. No urgency develops. No transformation approaches. Only physical continuity. The same wind. The same black horizon. The same frost gathering slowly over stone beneath a sky where morning does not exist anywhere beyond the distance.